Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is Justin Bemunyi and here are the major stories. President Buhari and other world leaders pay glowing tributes to former Zimbabwean leader Robert Mugabe, who passes on at 95. Nigeria and Niger Republic to synergize on ways of tackling humanitarian crisis within the sub-region. Plus, Nigerian government to demand legal compensation from South African government for victims of xenophobic attacks. Well, thank you very much for joining us. World leaders have continued to pay glowing tributes to the long-time Zimbabwean leader, Robert Mugabe, who passed on this Friday. Tributes from across the globe commend the leadership qualities of the man who led the liberation movement of his people. And Delia Tumbi reports.
The Nigerian leader, President Muhammadu Buhari, sent condolences to the government and people of Zimbabwe. In his message, the president commiserated with the family members, friends and political associates of the political activist who fought for the independence of the country from colonial rule and lived most of his life in public service. President Buhari believes Mugabe's sacrifices, especially in struggle for the political and economic emancipation of his people, will always be remembered by posterity. From South Africa comes a report that President Cyril Ramaphosa joined the people and government of Zimbabwe in mourning the passing of a liberation fighter and champion of Africa's cause against colonialism. Ramaphosa posited that under President Mugabe's leadership, Zimbabwe's sustained struggle against colonialism inspired South Africa's struggle against apartheid and built in them the hope that one day South Africa too would be free. The Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta said Robert Mugabe served with commitment and dedication. Kenyatta maintained that Mugabe was an elder statesman, a freedom fighter, and a Pan-Africanist who played a major role in shaping the interests of the African continent. In his honor, Kenyan leader directed that the country's flags be flown at half-mast for 3 days. Tanzanian President John Magufuli lamented that Africa has lost one of its bravest and Pan-Africanist leader who led by example in opposing colonialism. In a related development, the Chinese government described Mugabe as an outstanding national liberation movement leader. One of the Asian Tigers government averred that throughout his life, he firmly defended the sovereignty of his people, opposed foreign interference, and actively promoted China-Zimbabwe and China-Africa friendship and cooperation. Robert Mugabe ruled his country for 37 years. In Abuja, Dele Atumbi, NTA News.
Well, call him a political icon, outspoken African legend and one of Africa's longest-serving president. Robert Gabriel Mugabe, former president of Zimbabwe, had many shades in opinion and political philosophy. As he passes on, correspondent Harman Jabani gives us some perspectives about the man, Robert Mugabe.
Robert Gabriel Mugabe was born on 21st February 1924. He was the son of a carpenter and a descendant of the majority Shona-speaking people in a country then under the white minority rule. Robert Mugabe was educated at a Catholic mission school where he qualified as a teacher, secured scholarship at Fort Harare University in South Africa. He acquired the first of his 7 academic degree before teaching in Ghana, where he was greatly influenced by the Pan-Africanist idea of Ghana's post-independent leader, Kwame Nkrumah.
He will go down in history as a great nationalist who fought for his people against the oppression of the white domination and colonialism. For that, it's a lasting legacy left behind.
Over his 3 decades in power, international perception scored with an increased number of criticism portray him as a dictator. Despite his long stay in power, he enjoyed the support of other African leaders who saw him as a hero of the fight against colonial rule.
There was no doubt about that he was a patriot, he was a nationalist, he was also a revolutionary. He indeed, one will say that in terms of the practice of decolonization, he will also go into the Hall of Fame of other similar African leaders that made sure that the people were not held in captivity.
He was considered a Pan-Africanist as he supported the seizure of white farmers' land in Zimbabwe without compensation. He was a strong advocate of African patriotism as well as a towing advocate of African nationalism. The climax of his political nosedive was on 19 November 2017 when ZANU-PF removed him as party leader and issued a deadline of 20th November for Mugabe to resign the presidency, but he did not. On 21st November, he sent a letter of resignation to Zimbabwe's parliament. Consequently, Emmerson Mnangagwa was sworn in as president on 24th November 2017.
We led the struggle, formed the Patriotic Front, and defeated colonialism. And we ushered in a new dispensation for Zimbabwe. The people were free. They were able now to determine their future. Yes, there were still areas where freedom was still required, and these are the economic areas.
Before his death, Robert Gabriel Mugabe had been receiving treatment at a hospital in Singapore since April. Hamman Jabani, NTA News.
Now to talk more on the life and times of the late Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, we have in the studio Dr. Mukhtar Imam, diplomacy and international relations expert and lecturer, Bayes University, Abuja. Sir, glad to have you join us on the news.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Robert Mugabe was an outspoken African legend and one of Africa's longest-serving president.
Yes.
How did he shape his country's political history?
Very, very significantly. Robert Mugabe, God rest his soul, was the first post-colonial leader of Zimbabwe, and he made his mark on history. He significantly contributed to the emancipation of the Zimbabwean people from what was termed the infamous Universal Declaration of Independence by the then erstwhile colonial powers that were holding Zimbabwe ransom. He significantly played a role in bringing about the decolonization process to not just Zimbabwe, but to the entire sub-region of Southern Africa. And so, yes, Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe will go down in history and will be remembered as one of those who not just fought for the liberation of Zimbabwe, but the entire African continent.
Now, the international community has a different perspective about him. What's your take?
Well, the reality is there's always going to be that perception, whether domestically or internationally. Every country will hold a certain notion of an individual. I will try to portray that image of that individual to the international system, depending on how they relate with that individual. International relation is not always about having smooth relations between and amongst countries or even actors within the international system. Mugabe, yes, was an individual who was multifaceted, you would want to say. He was a man of many faces. Be that as it may, the one thing that Mugabe stood for was the emancipation and liberation of his people and his country, and that he did fight dearly for. He's one individual who in some quarters is seen as a liberation fighter, as a freedom fighter. In other quarters, he's seen as a thorn in the flesh. Say, for example, his relationship with Tony Blair and the entire United Kingdom. You will not blame them for holding grudges against him. But then again, of course, you would also have to give him the credit for having fought for the decolonization of his people, because colonialism did not in any way better the lives of his people, neither did it better the living condition of the African people in its entirety. So yes, that perception will be there, but it's left for posterity to judge the man. He has done his best, just like every other leader has. He had his flaws. Notwithstanding, the reforms which he brought to the people of Zimbabwe helped to move them out of the colonial clutches and clusters which they found themselves. As far as we know, on the African continent, liberation is a process. It's in phases, and the most important aspect of what Robert Mugabe did was to help move the Zimbabwean people out of the first stage of subjugation and subjection and oppression, which is to move them from that phase of the the colonization process. What is left is for those who would come after him to try to see how they can help emancipate the people of Zimbabwe. And like I said, liberation or emancipation is in 4 phases. There's first the movement from colonization. The second, the movement from new colonialism, which is about economic domination. And then there's third, the emancipation of Africans from Africans. And then the fourth aspect of it is the most important, is the mental liberation. And that is where we haven't gotten to yet. So, yes, by and large, Robert Mugabe did fairly and decently well in his country, and posterity will judge him. Okay. In the words of Plato, only the dead have seen the end of war. The Zimbabwean people have not, just like every other African, have not seen the end of war yet. So it's not for the others. All right.
Just before I let you go, briefly, what lessons can African leaders learn from the life and times of the former Zimbabwean president?
A lot. Like I said, Mugabe's life was actually filled with a lot of controversies from his land reforms, the A1, A2 so-called reforms, to all other policies. I think the major distinction between Robert Mugabe and Nelson Mandela was in the fact that Robert Mugabe was more efficient, if you ask me, in his ability to reclaim back the land and mandate of the Zimbabwean people and hand it back to them from the white colonizers and so forth, which is basically why we're seeing what is happening in Southern Africa, South Africa happening today. So I think African leaders have a lot to learn from him. He was a dedicated individual. He was committed to the liberation and freedom of his people, as much as there were a lot of controversies surrounding the economy and so on and so forth in Zimbabwe. The first thing that he stood for was about the right and freedom of the African first. And that, in my view, is something that should be celebrated. It's something that all other African leaders should imbibe and should try to propagate. We should be in the forefront of bringing about a united Africa. This is the last frontier. This is where the attention of the world is going to be in the future. And so let's begin to reclaim that mandate and find for ourselves a footing within the international system.
Well, Dr. Mukhtar Imam, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on Enter International.
Thank you for having me.
Well, for the last couple of minutes, I've been speaking with Dr. Mukhtar Imam, diplomacy and international relations expert and lecturer based University Abuja. Now, moving on, Speaker House of Representatives Femi Gbajabiamila has described as appropriate, timely and very instructive steps taken so far by the federal government in response to the xenophobic attacks against Nigerians in South Africa. Speaking to newsmen after a closed-door engagement with President Muhammadu Buhari on critical national issues, Speaker Gbajabiamila expressed the belief that the government's proactive undertakings clearly sent the right signals to South Africa.
Short, and I came home with the hope of reconvening the House so that we can address this very important issue. We have called that off because events have overtaken that. The government has taken very proactive steps, the same steps we would have asked for, and we're all on the same page with the president and the government.
Are there moves to cut bilateral ties with South Africa considering what is happening?
We're not there yet. Nothing is off the table. Nothing is off the table. We'll take each day as it comes. Myself now, the president has taken proactive steps in evacuating our citizens. Other things will follow. I believe we're going to stand with Nigerians and by Nigerians, and that's our priority, is to protect and the Constitution is to protect the welfare of the citizens, and that's exactly what we're doing, and that's exactly what the president is doing.
State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports that the relations between the executive and legislature, as well as preparations for the 2020 appropriations bill, were also discussed by the nation's first and fourth citizens.
We both want to bring the budget cycle back to what it used to be, January to December, and the only way to do that is for an early presentation of the budget, and we'll discuss that. And the recent $9 billion award against Nigeria, we discussed that as well. And clearly, we're in opposition to that, and steps will be taken.
So
Are we likely to see the budget go into the National Assembly this month?
I cannot give you a definite, but I know that the budget is going to come as early as possible. It may be the end of this month, maybe shortly thereafter. I cannot give you an exact date, but it's going to be an early presentation so that we can pass the budget before the end of the year and return to the cycle of January to December.
In another development, Speaker House of Representatives Femi Gbajabiamila says the National Assembly will not hesitate to authorize legal funding for Nigerian citizens who wish to take legal actions against identified perpetrators and sponsors of the dastardly act against them in South Africa. Speaker Gbajabiamila at a media conference in Abuja also expressed the displeasure of the National Assembly over xenophobic attacks on Nigerian nationals in that country. Now, Kenneth Nanim has the details.
The people and government of Nigeria have condemned in strong terms the xenophobic attacks on Nigerians residing in South Africa. Now, Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila puts in perspective various socio-political roles played by Nigeria towards freedom and peaceful building for economic development in the African continent, including South Africa. Therefore, the ill-treatment meted to Nigerians in that country is uncalled for.
We intend not only to determine the causes of these latest events, but also to assess and account for the losses in life and property that have occurred. This will allow the government to more accurately demand reparations to compensate our citizens who suffered in this recent orgy of violence.
Commending efforts by the federal government so far in dealing with the situation and the displeasure expressed by Nigerians at home, the Speaker urged Nigerians to continue to be patriotic and law-abiding.
We will achieve nothing by destroying businesses that employ our people and provide a living for our families. We will honor the lives of our fallen brothers by making sure that never again will our citizens' inalienable right to life and liberty be so wantonly denied here at home or anywhere else in the world.
The Speaker also urged Nigerians to unite and join hands with the government towards solving issues of insecurity and other challenges being faced by the country. Kenneth Nanim, NTA News.
In a related development, the Nigerian government will be demanding legal compensation, contrary to a report which says nothing provides the South African government to pay compensation on xenophobic attacks. Now, this was the reaction of the Foreign Affairs Minister Geoffrey Onyema after a meeting with the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs at the National Assembly. Abdullahi Aminu reports.
It was a closed-door meeting on the possible actions to be taken by the Nigerian government on the lingering issue. The minister said Nigeria is not satisfied with South African government's resort to either engage the service of insurance companies or make private arrangements for compensation.
With the distinguished senators, we were looking at some of the options that we have to ensure that this will be the last time that we will ever be meeting to be talking about Nigerians attacked in South Africa and to take definitive measures. But we want to do that and start doing that once we have all the facts available.
On the diplomatic ties between the two countries, the minister said Nigeria has not reached a stage where it will break diplomatic relations with South Africa.
There are different actions that can be taken at the diplomatic level without necessarily breaking off diplomatic ties. But we want our decision and Mr. President's decision to be an informed decision based after assessing all the facts.
We appeal to the Nigerians to remain calm. So far from the briefing that we have been given, we believe that the Nigerian government at the executive level are doing pretty much to ensure that the suffering of our people is alleviated, that we find a lasting solution to the problem.
The meeting has resolved not to make the entire possible options public pending the final report from the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa, which is engaging Nigerian Union in South Africa. From the National Assembly, Abdullahi Aminu, NTA News.
You're watching the news on NTA International, coming to you live from Abuja. The news continues shortly after this short break.
Hey, you! And are you how they talk to? I sabi you now. It's in your mind, Abi. The person with them go help us. Baba Toros and Shangalo. Oga Leguva, Mr. Sabi. And you know if we carry last for this one.
A spear into the top corner.
We Sabi say Pikin go crawl before in waka. So don't look, no help anybody. No dolly, no. So go for him. Go for football. Go for all Serie A and La Liga matches live. Go for GoTV Max.
You're welcome back. Buhari meets the governing All Progressives Congress has expressed absolute confidence in its ability to retain the governorship seat in Kogi State as the voting population returned to the polls in November this year. National chairman of the party, Adams Oshiomhole, stated these at a joint media briefing alongside the party's candidate, Governor Yahaya Bello, after an audience with President Muhammadu Buhari on the forthcoming gubernatorial election in the Confluence State. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports.
This is the first formal engagement between President Muhammadu Buhari and the Kogi State Governor Yahaya Bello since his overwhelming victory at the APC governorship primary election held recently. At the meeting also attended by the national chairman of the party, Adams Oshiomhole, President Buhari congratulated Governor Yahaya Bello for sustaining the confidence of his party members after the election adjudged to be free, fair and credible. Mr. Oshiomhole, while addressing newsmen shortly after the closed-door meeting, described the engagement with the president as fruitful and reassuring.
For the people of Kogi State, rather than trying to experiment with a new hand, they say a bird at hand is worth two in the bush. I think Governor Yahaya has shown that he has capacity. Going forward, he will have learned a couple of lessons in his first time. I have passed through that process. I know that your second term is always the time you do those legacy projects that you want to be remembered for. Because the only benefit in this business is when I leave, what will I be remembered for? That the thing that will drive Governor Yahaya Bello as he approach the second term, and those will be at the heart of our campaign. We have also seen the candidate nominated by PDP. We are not going to walk over him. We will contest with him and we will defeat him fairly and squarely.
Kogi State Governor and APC candidate for the November governorship election, Yahaya Bello, is optimistic of a victorious outing as he says the people of the Confluence State never had it so good.
I've been ready for this particular election right before even the last general elections that produced Mr. President, the National Assembly and the State House of Assembly. We are well prepared for the election. And as for victory, I think by the grace of God, it is assured. Like the national chairman have said, we're not going to take anything for granted. The citizens of Kogi State have actually seen my performance against the performance of the previous PDP governors in Kogi State. In less than 3.5 years, they have seen all my wonderful performances. Every local government in Kogi State are dotted with various infrastructural development. All along, I've chosen not to speak about the issue of salary because it's a problem I inherited. These past two governors couldn't solve it. I have come to solve it. That already is a kudos to this administration. These people of Kogi State have spoken before. In the last general election, they will speak again.
That I can confirm as Labour ambassador.
The Kogi State governorship election comes up on November 16, 2019. From the State House, Adamu Sambo, NTA News.
In the meantime, conduct of party primaries ahead of the governorship elections in Bayelsa and Kogi states ended Thursday, 5th of September. The next step is the submission of candidates. With just 72 days to go, Mia Ogidi has latest developments on the race to the Lord Lugard House in Lokoja and that of Creek Heaven in Yenagoa.
It is another busy day at the INEC headquarters. But my interest is the media center where both human and material resources have been deployed to receive candidates from the 59 political parties in Kogi and 58 in Bayelsa State that have indicated interest to participate in the forthcoming governorship elections, as the party primaries ended midnight Thursday, 5th of September 2019.
and there won't be any form of extension whatsoever.
Waiting rooms for the representatives of the political parties to take a second look at their documents before submission is set. And the image maker of INEC, Festus Okoye, is of the opinion that the umpire, that is INEC, is on a positive terrain for the exercise.
All the states have received the non-sensitive materials required for the conduct of the elections.
Democratic People's Party, DPP, and Up Democratic Party, HDP, are the first two political parties to engage INEC for the submission of candidates.
What we have not done is that to bring all our documents in three copies only. So
we are not going to receive any nomination that the party use TPEX to either clean up or TPEX the name of any individual.
The call, therefore, is on the political parties to submit their candidates early to avoid unnecessary pressure on the staff and also to avoid mistakes that may later become legal issues. Mie Ogidi, NTA News.
And that's where we end the news on Inter International. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Justin Bemunyi.